I'm Maggie Zhou, ZHOU, with Climate SOS, which is an organization based in US and Canada. And we are a member of the Climate Justice Now network, which is a large network of many hundreds of organizations. Many of them are themselves networks as well.
Okay, but one of your issues here is that there's plenty of money available in the world, but not being spent on climate change, being spent on militarization. Is that the case?
Absolutely. The United States alone spends more than $1 trillion a year on their current and past military spending. That means current wars, current military spending, and also paying for their veterans' needs from previous years, and also the interest of their previous year's military spending. So all that adds up for the 2011 budget. It adds up to like $1.16 trillion, and that's like 100 times, more than 100 times more than the money they're talking about for the first 3 years period from all of the developed countries combined to go into climate change, climate assistance. So and even for climate assistance, those $10 billion a year for the first 3 years, it's not even going to come from like direct funding, direct payment. It's actually mostly coming from loans, which they're expecting payment back, and also they're coming from private investments, meaning using carbon markets. It's always somebody's going to be profiting from it, and developed countries are not really getting the benefit. So if you compare that scale to the scale of military spending, it's very obvious.
And of course, a lot of that money pledged from the developed nations hasn't actually been paid to
Precisely.
the developing nations as
Exactly.
well. But so that's the situation. The money is there. But how do you how do you shame countries? I mean, what are the measures you need to take to ensure a country like the United States and other developed nations pay that money into climate change rather than militarization?
It's really, first of all, I think we first must shine a spotlight on this issue, because most of the world do not know. Most people on the street have their daily lives. They do not know that the world's military spending in a year is like $1.5 trillion, and the United States makes up the biggest share of that. And if people know so much money is going into military, which is mainly to control oil access and access to other resources, and it's for domination, it's for aggression, right? Not to speak of all the lives lost, mostly innocent civilians, women and children, and also environmental destruction in the countries that are being bombed at. They're using depleted uranium in their weapons, which is not containable. Once it's used in the warfare, that whole region is contaminated. So there are many cities in Iraq are extremely radioactively contaminated, Basra, Fallujah, etc. And there are medical reports, even just a few years after those battles were fought using these depleted uranium, there are already medical reports showing the cancer rates are, doubling, tripling many times, and also birth defects, child mortality rates, and cancer rates in all age groups, sex ratios, etc. Are all distorted. And this doesn't even wait 10 years. It's much faster than even what people were, earlier in World War II, when the atomic bomb was dropped in Japan. Scientists didn't know that cancer rate was going to go up until like 10 years later. And now, maybe because we know what to look for, but scientific reports are already finding this. This is horrendous. And I looked into the detailed numbers. The numbers are climbing exponentially, so it's not even plateauing yet. This is really, really a humanitarian disaster. So that's the humanitarian side of it. Certainly, any war, that's the fundamental, the number one problem is you're violating human rights, and this is not even like just justified. There's no invasion, there's no national security threat to the United States. But the thing is, by spending most of the money on military, by securing access to oil so that they can continue to burn oil, they are threatening the survival of the entire humanity. And also, U.S. military, for example, is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas. If you look at the institutional emission, they are the largest source. They are also the largest oil consumer in the world. So whichever way you look at it, military has to stop. They have to divert the military spending from divert the spending from military to human needs and to funding climate change. But that won't happen unless we make people aware of it. And we have a lot of work to do. I'm from an NGO, and our work is to educate people not only about the need to do something about the climate urgently, and if we have time, I want to talk also about how urgent it is, because I'm a scientist from biological sciences, and I've been following climate change, climate science for the last 2.5 years. Right. So in fact, all the targets they're talking about in these negotiation texts is totally irrelevant to saving the planet. Even the IPCC report from 2 years ago, those targets are completely outdated as well. But right now, I just want to focus a little more on the military issue. So one thing people the politicians, for example, don't quite realize, and I think some of them may be a little bit more aware, but in general, this is an issue that even most experts and the politicians' advisors are not really very aware of, or thinking along those lines, is that we are really a very interconnected world. The ecosystem, all the biodiversity experts in that field are far more desperate than climate scientists, because we see how on the ground and in the oceans, how ecosystems are very quickly degrading, and one system's failure triggers cascading failures in other systems, and we can have a whole system collapse very quickly. So, and different regions of the world, there are tropical areas and so on that are much more faster, affected by desertification. And these leaders sitting there from developed countries, I think they are in a bubble. They're in a bubble because they talk to, the people in their circle, and mostly from big businesses. They all feed off of each other's ideas. They really think that they can build a fortress America, build a fortress Europe, and somehow isolate themselves from the suffering, from the misery of the rest of the world when climate change becomes really bad. But what happens is that once you have, let's say, Amazon forest start getting to that flipping point where it suddenly goes drought and decimates, and what if much of the Africa is decimated by desertification, or India, or Bangladesh, what happens is that people will be driven to desperation. We all need to find sustenance, water, for survival and food. So what will you have to do? You will have to go into any forest, anywhere where there is still any wildlife alive, and you have to go hunting because you have to survive. That's very natural. It's totally to be expected. So what we're seeing is that basically human response in the end could be the worst impact that will send climate into total chaos. Right. So worst climate impact may actually come from human response. There's a recent study on that. Right. And on our website, climatesos.org, we have a fact sheet that puts a lot of this resource in there, and also we have a one-page statement which we are asking organizations to sign on, opposing militarism and demanding climate action. We are actually going to be delivering this statement to the delegations on Friday, and we're going to have a press conference on it too. So
I know one of the other points you wanted to emphasize was that as the effects of climate change become more apparent, countries may be forced to fight over scant resources. So yes. So militarization will increase.
Indeed, and this is in fact the scenarios that the Pentagon itself commissioned a report, and this report has basically talked about such scenarios in very honest, very stark, very horrifying detail. I can read you a quote. They're saying that once again warfare would define human life, but because they're not quite thinking about how our world is interconnected, they're still thinking about beefing up the military muscle of America so that they can keep out all the migrants from Mexico, for example, or from South America through Mexico, and to increase their long-range capabilities so that they can do away with those military bases that will be lost because they are sitting on the low-lying islands that will be flooded, right? But they don't care about the deaths of people in places that will really be decimated. Here's a quote from a Pentagon report. It says, "Deaths from war as well as starvation and disease will decrease population size, which over time will rebalance with carrying capacity." It's a very cold-blooded calculation. That's unfortunately the dominating thinking that is going on among the world's elite leaders, and that's a problem we have. So our job is really, all of us from civil society, we have to get the message out to people from the bottom up, and we have to demand change of the system. And in Copenhagen, as you must know, the slogan on the street was system change, not climate change.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.